Hi, welcome back to the Marshall Modification Project. My name's Austin, and this channel explores Marshall amp mods from an academic perspective.
And I'm Dan Pratt. Today we're talking to Tommy Folkesson about his journey as an amp modder. This is an academic interview, and we try to get the amp modders' ideas in their own words. So, if you notice we're not talking much, that's kind of the point. Anyway, we hope you enjoy the interview.
So the first question, Tommy, is a pretty general one. Can you just tell me about your experience of modifying Marshalls? You can start off at wherever you want to start off in your career.
Okay, so I started private piano lessons when I was 6 because I wanted to play the piano, and when I was 13 I went into a band, and then I played an electric organ. That was in 1969, and we had I got into another band, a better band, in 74, and we had Marshalls all over for guitar and bass, and they were super leads, and they played very nice at screaming volume. So I had a problem to solve, and I then had started an engineer education in electronics. So I tried different things to get a lower volume, but nice distortion. But that was not so easy at that time. There were no good distortion pedals, and I tried with an old tape recorder, for example, to get the distortion, and then play the Marshall a bit lower. But it was a lot of trouble. So I got very interested in guitar sounds when I heard Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, and Richard Blackmore, my hero. So I just, that was in 73, I think. I heard Made in Japan. That was the first Purple album, and then The Machine had. And I was really struck by the sound and how they played and everything. So it started there, and my interest for guitar sounds just growed. So, and I got my engineer education ready, and I started to work as a tech on a music shop in a small town in Sweden. And then I had to learn all the practical things in repairing, and the first amp I modified was Fender Vibrolux, and that was in 1980. And then a friend of mine had a Vox AC50, and he just put it on my workbench and said, do something fun, and just make a sound, anything you like. And I did a cascade connection between the input stages. I got some distortion and a gain and a master volume, and 2 setups of tone controls, so I could reduce the bass before distortion circuit, and then raise the bass after, so I got a good deep sound in the speaker. That Vox sounded very, very, very good, and I just was wondering what happened, and I tried to analyze and make measurements and try to understand what was happening, because the sound was very good. And then in 85, one famous guitar player in Stockholm was touring, and he came to our town, and he had a Fender Super Reverb, and he liked what I did, so he asked me to modify it. And then he took it back to Stockholm, and after just a year or 2, I had modified many amps among the famous guitarists. The guitarist that was playing behind all the artists. They were all from Stockholm and had sessions in studios and because of that, there was a lot of talk, and I just had more work and more to do, and I always tried to explore and make things better, make better circuits and get the sound better, of course. So that was from the start until 1980. 85, 86, 87. In 1988, Kee Marcello from Europe called me and wanted to have something special, some personal touch in his sound, because he was making his first album with Europe. So he came to my workshop and we tried some filters and so on, and he was talking about Brian May's sound, for example, very personal, very specific sound, and I tried to do a mid boost filter on his amps, and he liked it, and I made 2 modified Marshalls for him and 1 slave Marshall, because he had a stereo setup. Yeah, that was a lot of talk, and there was I had some trouble with that amp, because when he was in London and he was making the rehearsals for the album with Europe, it all broke down. The switching system didn't work, and I had to go there to repair it, and that was. It was very nice to meet Kee and all the Europe members. And I did the work in the nights in their rehearsal studio, and I got things working again. So he toured the world with those Marshalls. Yeah, do you understand what I say? My English is
no, that was brilliant.
Perfect. Yeah, keep going, Tommy. If there's anything else you need to tell us, keep talking. We're understanding it loud and clear.
So we're doing that thing also where we pause and let you talk. It's
okay. Yeah. From then on, there was, of course, some phone calls from other countries, and I did also more to Swedish musicians and bands, more work and more modifications. It was Helicopters, for example, a famous Swedish band, and different musicians in Stockholm, and then I lost his name. Frank Marino from Canada called me. That was in 2000, and he had been touring in Sweden, and his gear broke down, and he just went into a local music shop, and there was a modified Marshall secondhand, and he bought it, and he used it on a festival, and he liked it very much. So he called me when he got home, and I sent him 2 modified Marshalls after a while, which I still think he uses after what I've seen. And so it all became my life from I had my first job. So I have worked with repairs and modifications from 1980, and always try to develop and get things sound better.
So, Tommy, that's all really interesting. I'm wondering if there were any particular other techs that were influencing what you were doing, other people modifying Marshalls, and that can either be inside Sweden or inside Europe, or outside into maybe the States or somewhere else. Were you kind of aware of other kind of techs and modders at that time?
That time, I think there was no one in Sweden or Scandinavia for that. I was the first one who started in Scandinavia with modification, as far as I know, and that was in early 80s, and I read about Paul Rivera. He made the modifications for Steve Lukather and for Larry Carlton, I think, and others, and so I understand it, that I could see that it was going on in America, so I thought it will come to Sweden too. And at that time, I realized that maybe I can make a living out of this. So I had no influences when I started, and then, of course, I have looked later. I have looked into Cameron and Friedman and Boner and everyone else when I have the chance. Mostly when I repair an amp from Wagner, for example, I look into the circuits and listen what happens, of course. But maybe my personality is not that. I want to make things on my own and develop my own ideas, and that's always been my approach to it.
So that's, again, an interesting point that you made. So you were kind of generally familiar with maybe some of the modifications that were happening in America. It doesn't necessarily need to be at a schematic level, but had you the opportunity maybe to draw influence from any of those approaches that was, the modification style from America? Were you able to bring any of that into your work in Sweden, let's say back in the 80s, and if so, how?
No, I didn't do that in the 80s. I had no chance to look into these guys at that time, but later on I have done that, and I looked into Jose and Friedman and everyone else. And the point is that nearly everyone that I see are using the cathode follower that Marshall took from Fender basements when they started to design their amps, and it's the same cathode follower that makes the distortion in Camerons and Friedmans and Wagners and everyone, nearly everyone. So I use that too, but I have designed filters and things around it, compression circuits and power dynamics and everything around it to make it even better than it. But it's a good sound original as well. We know that from Marshalls, that they have a good distortion sound in the preamp.
This kind of ties into my third question, and you can be quite general with this, or you can maybe draw upon a specific example. But if I was to ask you to describe kind of maybe a modification to Marshall that you've done in the past, and you can go into as much detail or as you want. Could you just kind of talk me through that process and maybe a bit about what you're thinking whenever you're modifying a Marshall? What comes to your mind whenever I ask that question?
Yeah, I had a friend who had some good sound in his distortion pedal at that time in the 70s, and that was a big muff that he used into a transistor amp, and he had a very good distorted sound at low levels. So I asked him how he did it, and he said, I started with a color sound wah-wah, and I put it just in the middle to get a mid boost sound, and then the big muff sounded much cleaner and better and more attack but he said that after using his color sound, because it was very noisy, he tried to build a simpler circuit to do the same thing. And I asked him what he did, and he said, I just filtered off very very much of the low frequencies. So much less of bass into the distortion circuit. And then he used the tone control to get the bass back. So that's what I started with. I understood it that you can't have too much distortion in the bass compartment. So that's what I did with the Vox AC30. I filtered off. I did a lot of bass cut and then raised the bass afterwards again. So that's you can take any distortion circuit and do that thing to get a better, more distinct bass from a guitar. So that's what I started with, but then everything developed very much, and today I do very special things around. It's just not filtering, and it's a lot of other things that I put into this cathode follower and the distortion circuits today. There are, for example, signal loops that I do in the preamp, filtered signal loops, almost like a presence loop in a standard Marshall, but I do it in the preamp to get the same response from a preamp that I get in a power amp at high volumes.
That's cool.
So that is one thing of my own, and I can say probably I'm the most experienced in the world in checking out how different manufacturers built their things, because I have modified over 150 different models from Fenders, from Selmer, from Orange and Marshall and everyone. So I think I have a lot of experience in how they built their circuits, and I try to learn, but I don't like to copy. So I always like to think around it and why it sounds like it do, and I try to make my own ideas and develop from that.
Great.
Excellent, Tommy. That's really useful, and the point you made towards the end about all the different amps you've modified kind of connects into Dan's question quite nicely. So I'll hand you over to Dan for a few questions.
Yeah, it's kind of, circuit difference between amps, but how does the circuit design of Marshall amps enable or complicate modifications compared to other amps you've worked on? Since you've worked on such a lot of amps, is there a difference in the Marshall circuit that makes it easier or more difficult to mod?
The old Marshalls are quite simple circuits, and all the amps from 70s and 80s, start of the 80s, are very simple. They don't have effects loop. They are just very plain and very easy to understand. Marshalls have kept their cathode follower over the time, and they still use it in the JVM and in all the vintage models that they still do. And it's not so common in other Fenders. Don't use it that much. Some other amps use it, but the idea came from the old 50s Fender bassman that Marshall borrowed. So I think tube circuits are quite simple. You just need 3 stages of amplification to make high gain sound. And if you use 2, you can have a clean sound and a little crunch, loose crunch. So, and around these tubes, there are very simple filters and just resistors and capacitors, and it's very easy to understand. And if you change a value, you don't get that much out of it. get maybe a little different touch and so on. If you still need to have the right filtering, of course, before and after distortion circuit. But I think, yeah, the different manufacturers, they have a little different approach, a little different filtering. Then maybe they have a little bass cutoff in the first stage, and then another manufacturer have a little more bass cutoff in the second stage, but not so different. And then they built these loop circuits and switching circuits and MIDI controls and everything, and that makes everything more complex and difficult, of course, but doesn't affect the sound if it's a good design.
Brilliant. So, I mean, obviously, could you compare it to like a specifically different circuit? So, say, for example, a bit more detail about the sort of Fender circuit versus the Marshall circuit when you're thinking about modifying an amplifier. Does it push you in a different direction?
No, because they are quite similar, I think. So I think a lot of filtering in making the filtering right. That's the first thing I do, and then I try to get the right amount of gain if it's a distortion circuit, and I just in all when I do this standard mods, I just use the circuits that I have in this model that I try to modify. So it can be a little bit different from model to model, but I don't do very different things. I just try to get the most of every stage in the circuit to make it work exactly as I want to. And that can be a little bit different, but not so much. I just use capacitors and resistors and some pots and put it together.
Yep.
It's nothing
strange. It's simple. That's why you dedicated your whole life to it.
It's very strange.
Sorry, is it okay if I just ask the follow up? Tommy, I guess kind of maybe if I'm just a bit more direct with the question now, because we've asked quite open-ended versions of it. Obviously, when you think about modifications, Marshalls are the first thing that come to mind, probably for a lot of people, and there's obviously a lot written about Marshall modifications. Why do you think Marshalls are just such a popular platform, particularly back in, let's say, the 70s and 80s and so on? Why do you think they were such a popular platform to mod, if they were in Sweden at all?
I think Sweden had the most Marshalls per person in any country, because the agent got prices for selling so much Marshalls in Sweden. So we have a lot, even from the 60s, Plexis and so on. And I think it was because Marshall was the big. You saw the Marshalls behind every rock band. The rock bands came from Britain mostly, and so Swedish guitarists wanted to use Marshalls as well. There was just a lot of them. That's the explanation, I think. If we have had a lot of Fenders, we had seen a lot of modifications on Fenders as well.
Right. You bring up an interesting point about this, which leads on to my next question, which is a lot of guitarists using Marshalls as an interesting kind of lead into how do guitarists' demands for specific tones or performance things, how does that shape your approach to modifying Marshall amps?
Oh, I don't think I understand what you mean.
Oh, sorry. How do performers drive your modifications?
Oh. Well, I listen to what they want, of course. If they want to play in stereo, I help them with that. And if they have different guitarists sounds very different in the same circuit and in the same amp. So I try to make it more more specific and useful for their performance. So that's my clients are what are pushing me further, and my own ears, what I like to hear. That's yeah.
Are there any specific demands you could tell us about, like a particular guitarist who wants a particular thing?
Yeah, I told you about Kee Marcello, and of course, when I have the most common thing I think is that the guitarists have their amp and they don't like what it sounds like, and the most common problem is that the bass is too not tight enough. It's too blurry and too muddy, and I try to make it sound more distinct, as a faster attack, and that's what most of them want.
Has it evolved over time, or is there a trend of tighter bass through the 80s or looser bass in the 90s or something like that? Is there during the different decades?
Yeah, it was looser. The bass was looser in 70s and 80s, a little bit tighter in 80s, and then the hard metal rock came along, and in the 90s, and Metallica and everything, and they made a lower tune on their guitar, and it was even more demanding to get the filtering right in the bass compartment. After that, the metal guys, they wanted a kind of different attack with more trebly and sizzly attack, and that's what I try to do for them. Mm-hmm. So nowadays I have a metal switch. So I can, on my Mark 7 4-channel mods, I have a vintage sound, the default, and then you can push a switch and get a metal sound from the same circuit. Just some small changes.
I love the idea of a metal switch.
Yeah. Are
That's
you
so
a guitarist, cool. Both of you?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess. I guess so.
I don't know. We have a particular look.
Yeah. And interest in guitars, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny. We've got plenty of other musician friends who would not be interested in like the specific circuit modifications, but for us, it's very exciting. So,
do you do mods on your own?
I have done a mod on. I have a 20-watt Silver Jubilee, and I did a bright cap modification. So I really like the Silver Jubilee one, the 1,000 picofarad cap on the input. When I'm cranking it and distorting it, I think it sounds great. But as soon as I pull it back, it's too nasty on the ear. So I put a 470 switch in there, and I really like the sound of the 470. And it means because I'm not pushing so much top end in, I get less distortion at higher volumes with the 470 than I do with the 1,000, because the 1,000 distorts a lot earlier. So it just opened up my clean headroom, and I just love that little switch. It transformed the amp for me.
Nice.
So yeah, I love this stuff.
Yeah.
Are there any? Sorry, moving on to my question 6, because we want to find out more about you. Which is, do you have any specific guitar playing techniques that you've observed guitarists using or developing due to the tones specifically produced by Marshall amps? Like, are there any techniques, as I think you kind of alluded to some of the stuff about deeper tuning, but I should leave that a little more to you.
Yeah, I think I dived into Eddie Van Halen's sound about 10 years ago, using a 100-watt Marshall as a distortion box, plainly. So I tried to. I had a Marshall which I did many mods to, and I tried to get his sound, and I tried to analyze what was happening when you drive a Marshall that hard. I got some ideas out from that, and that is that the power unit can't deliver the voltage. The voltage is a little bit over 500 volt in a Plexi Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't play it at no sound, and when you play it that loud and high gained as Eddie does, it drops from 500 to 400 about that. So it can't deliver as much, and that is a big part of his sound, especially when you hear him playing this mandolin, very fast picking. You know, the amp responds immediately to that, and you always have a clear attack in every pick, and that's very special to his technique. And I think he developed his playing out of how the amp sounded. It was a collaboration between the sound from the amp and his development as a musician, I think. And I tried to do this in because I beat the distortion in the preamp, and I always try to make it sound like a big power amp at high volume, and that's a bit difficult. But I think I tried to do this. I call it the power pumping in Eddie Van Halen's Marshall. I tried to do it in the preamp so I can get the same response as he had. And I tried that for many years to make a circuit that made this work, but I couldn't do it until last year. So now I have a small circuit. I call it the power pump that I put into my mods to get the voltage drop very fast and recover very fast. It's very important with the timing. As you pull a string, the voltage drops about 20%, get back very, very fast. And I can't explain it, but it feels much easier to play, and it feels like the attack is faster. It's responding faster from your pick.
Fantastic. I think that kind of takes care of my follow-up question actually on that one. I might hand you back across to Austin for and let him chat to you for a little while, so don't hog you all the time.
Thanks, Dan. Yes, again, really, really cool stuff, Tommy. And we're going to just shift a little bit in terms of the kind of context here. We're going to talk a little bit around the kind of culture of modding. So I think, how would you say that your interactions with other technicians or guitarists, maybe sharing techniques or sharing approaches, and again, you can reference back to the 1980s, or you can bring it right up to present day. How would you think this has kind of shaped the sense of community around modifications? And that can be in Sweden or it can be globally.
You mean between different musicians?
Or techs? Oh, yeah.
Or
So
techs.
between musicians or techs, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Okay, so let's say back in the 1980s, for example, was there any kind of community around this kind of modification culture? And then we could go to the evolution of the internet and up to current day. So taking all that into consideration, what's your kind of perspective on that kind of community and culture around modifications, and how do you see kind of your part in it?
Yeah, as I said, in the 80s, in the early 80s, I had no one to talk to, and I had no one who tried to do the same thing as I did in Sweden. I just tried to develop things myself. And when internet came, it was a big difference, of course, because then there are so many YouTube movies you can look at to see what different people do to the amps, and it's an explosion of knowledge and techniques to modify circuits. And it's very different from when I started, because I had simply no one who understanding what I did and what I tried to do at that time.
And then when the internet sort of, started to, become, let's say in the 1990s, where it was still maybe bulletin boards and, small forums and so on, that evolution, were there any particular kind of user groups or bulletin boards or forums and maybe that you would go on to at that point? And did you post on them? And kind of what was the sense of the kind of community and culture around those groups?
I haven't, what do you say? I haven't, no, I can't find the word. I have participated anything in all these discussions and forums and everything on internet. I think it makes my brain distort a little if I do that. So I try to do my own thing, and of course I'm from an older generation, so I use the internet. Of course, I use email and everything, but I'm not so into that. It takes a lot of time, and you just yeah. Of course, I can get some ideas, but it takes a lot of time, and I like to sit here on my workbench trying to develop things. That's what I like to do by myself. If you see.
Yeah, I understand. And what about, obviously in America, they've got NAMM and you've kind of got this kind of culture as well. Was there anything in Sweden or Europe that was equivalent, maybe where you were able to meet other techs and exchange ideas? Was there anything going on around that time, or even in current days, or anything in Sweden or Europe, or do you go to NAMM, or do you participate in any of these kind of events?
I don't participate so much. I have been to some guitar events in Sweden, in Gothenburg, and in Stockholm, but not many. There are several years between I do it, and I like to meet my clients and all the guitarists, but I'm a little bit of a loner, I think. I like to sit here with my circuits. And I haven't been to NAMM. I've been to Frankfurt Fair, the big fair in Europe, for a couple of times, 3 times, I think. But just as watching. I didn't have my own booth also.
And I think from one of those, if I remember correctly, that's how you met Henrik, right? I think you met Henrik at one of the kind of guitar fairs in Sweden.
That was in Gothenburg at a fair in 2010. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, brilliant. And just tying into that then, so obviously, you met Henrik, and you've got quite a reputation in Sweden. So tell us a little bit about your reputation in Sweden and how that was affecting, how that impacted the guitar players that came to you, and the kind of respect that you had as an amp technician.
Yeah. Of course, it's nice to have a name, and I was when I got a little bit famous in Stockholm among these session guitarists. It was much easier for me to get clients coming from all over the country and ask for my services, of course. So, but I don't think there are mainly people playing at home or in their rehearsal studios. They are 95% of my clients, and very few are these more musicians, professional musicians. So it's of course it's useful to have a name and a reputation, and I think that was why Henrik came to Gothenburg at that time. And when I heard him play, it was so nice. That's the best thing of going to a fair, that some guitar player that you don't know plug into your amp, and it's the perfect combination. And that was what happened when Henrik played. So I really started to talk to him and asked how he did it, and where he was from and everything. And then he told me that he had tried to modify some amps. And I tried to help him a little in the start. I sent him my old instruments, an oscilloscope and the tone generator and so on, so he could start with better information, do measurements in a better way. And he ordered a modified amp from me. He sent me a Laney amp that I modified. And as he got it, he immediately started modifying my modification. So, and he had good ideas, I think. So, he's, and most of all, he's a fantastic guitar player. I think with a tremendous tone. And of course, now he's working as I do, and sending a lot of amps, mostly to America, I think. So it was nice to see him, and that's the first person that I can really get into circuits and talk to. And we have exchanged schematics and so on, and ideas, and I have tried some of his ideas, and he's tried mine, and we have made some progress together, really. Mm-hmm. So that's very nice.
Cool. But just before I hand you over to Dan for the last two questions, can I just ask? It's not a direct follow up to this, but it's based upon something you said. You're a player yourself, Tommy. How important do you think it is for this kind of technicians and modifiers to actually be players? How important is it for you to be able to hear back those tweaks and changes you've made to a circuit, as a player?
I'm really not a player. I started with piano lessons. I never played guitar in a band. I have never played guitar in a party. So I can do some licks, and I think I have a proper tone, a proper vibrato, and but I'm not a good guitarist at all. But I think I can get. I try my licks, and it sounds good. That's what I use. It's crazy.
So when you're modifying the amp, though, are you kind of playing it? Are you testing it as you're playing? Is there anything you're looking for as a player while you're modifying? Or perhaps maybe, what was it you heard in Henrik? You said that that was the perfect combination. What was it you heard in Henrik that made you think that that's the perfect combination?
It's of course his technique and his musicality. It's mostly it's his way to pick a chord or a string. I think he's got the fastest. What do you say? This part in Europe. he's very fast in his hands. That's a big difference, and that's what I look for the most. It's what the sound of this first milliseconds of the pick. What is coming out, and what do you feel about that? That is the most important. And I think what Henrik did was just the right thing to get my amps. I couldn't get that sound from my amps that he did. So it's very important. I think at least 50% is in the player's hands. And then maybe if you have the right combination, you can get a good sound. So the amp is not as important as the player. That's my idea.
It's interesting. Yeah, we've heard during these interviews, we were right across the spectrum where we spoke to Dan Gower and Jason Tong, who are fantastic players, and they very much, as part of their development, they're always testing out their amps. And then we've heard stories from Dave Friedman, who said that Jose couldn't play at all, and he just bashed the strings, in his workshop to get an idea of how it sounded.
I didn't know.
so it's quite interesting just to see that spectrum, from non-players and excellent. I'll hand you over to Dan for the final two questions.
Yeah, brilliant. Again, we're shifting gears into a bit of historical modifications and the influence of Marshall modifications. So because obviously there were a lot of Marshall modifications, especially in the 80s, have those gone on to influence any other amp designs that you're familiar with?
Yeah, it was it happened something when the Soldano, when they what was called the 100-watt Soldano was very popular in the 90s, and was used by many players. Then I looked into that circuit to see what and there was a little special thing that he did, and I could see that in the Mesa rectifier just after that, and in some other amps too. Used that there was a different value of the cathode resistor in the third stage, I think. So it makes a special mix of distortions, overtones, and that was very influencing for others. They just copied what Soldano did at that time in the 90s.
So Soldano is the big one that sticks out.
Yeah. At that time, yes, it was used by the Peavey 5150. The same idea.
Yeah, it seems like seems like there were quite a few that kind of grew out of that. Is there? So was Soldano the point, or when you looked at the 5150 versus the Soldano, did you notice any big jumps in change, or is it quite similar, or how did you see that?
Quite similar, more stages, more amplification stages in the 5150, so more gain, but it was standard circuits, nothing special.
And it's always about more gain, it seems.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, I guess this brings us up to our final question, which is, so this one, some of our participants have got a bit squeamish around because we start talking about digital stuff and amp modeling and all that sort of stuff. Do you see the future of amp modding evolving with the rise of digital modeling techniques? Is there something that's kind of reflected in the amp modeling culture that is starting to happen a little bit more digitally?
As far as I know, this kind of IR digital modeling they are making very good copies of other amps and other speakers and microphones on the whole circuit, but they are not developing any better sound in my world. They are just making less better or less better copies of what is really existing, and I don't remember what you asked now, but
it's actually, you bring up a really interesting concept that what I'm noticing with you is you're hearing something of how because you said this is the amp and the player, and they respond together with each other, and you hear this thing and then go, how could I change that amp to suit the player? And then you said the IR is a copy.
Yeah.
Which means, would you mind expanding a little bit on that?
Yeah, because when they do it digitally, that they analyze what is happening from the guitar and all the way through the amp and the speaker and the microphone, and they make the best copy they can out of that, with everything responding dynamically, and it can. I have tried with the Kemper. I made some IRs from my amp and my speaker, and when I A/B check them, I can't hear any big difference. So it works very well. But to play a tube amp at high volume is a special experience, and you can't copy that with a digital amp and a transistor power stage, for example, power amp, because there are things happening from the player, with the amp and the player, and the amp responding to this what the speaker does, and the speaker is also a generator of signals, sending it back to the output of the amp. So the amp and the speaker is very much responding to each other, and that never happens with a transistor power amp, because it's the damp factor is so high. So anything the speaker does for itself won't do anything to the amp when you're talking about transistor circuits. So that's a big difference. And when you play a power amp at high volume, it's kind of the best experience a guitar player can have, because it's like riding a fast motorbike or something. It's so powerful, and you feel it in your body. The push and the attack is so fast, and it's very hard to get that from any other circuit, I think, because it's a collaboration between amp, speaker, and the player all the way.
Yeah, I would also just not wanting to push you in any particular direction, but I would note that a lot of the people who play digital amps nowadays didn't grow up with tube amps.
No, not that much. But I've heard stories from my clients when their sons, for example, if they play guitar and they try daddy's old Marshall amp and crank it up, they are so fascinated about what happens and how it feels to do that. And it's the digital development and IRs and all these Kempers and whatever, they are so good if you tour, because you have the same sound on every stage, and maybe you use in-ears, and it's always the same, and you feel at home, and you're used to how it sounds. But I think it can't be the same as playing a Marshall stack behind you. It can never be. Put in some in-ears and play a Kemper, for example. Even if the audience feels and hears the same thing, that's possible, but not for the player.
Yeah, I mean, I had a student who has, for his whole life, used digital, and we just got a Marshall Plexi in here, and he said it's the first time he's ever hit a guitar and the speaker physically hit him at the same time. Yeah. And he said, I didn't know how to play it. It's like riding a wild horse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a difference.
Can I just ask a follow-up, if that's okay? Tommy, you said you've made your own Kemper profiles. Have you found any interest in your work coming from other Kemper profiles that are out there? Are you aware of any kind of resurgence of interest in your work coming from that direction?
I haven't dived into that at all, really.
So you haven't had any clients coming and saying, "Hey, Tommy, I've played a Kemper profile of your amp. I want the real one now."
No, that hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
That's the reason I bought a Marshall amp. I loved the Line 6 version of the JTM 45, and then I was desperate to play a real one.
Yeah. And what happened then?
The real thing was much better.
Yeah.
Not even a question. But it was it's like watching a photocopy versus a full color picture.
I have some clients that have played just through a distortion pedal, and they want to modify the Marshall, and I make it for them, and that's the same response. They can't play it. They just want it. There must be something wrong with it, I say.
Yeah, I think that's Marshall's.
It's too hard, and it's I don't like it.
I think that's a Marshall thing in general. There's nowhere to hide with a Marshall.
It's more like playing with a clean sound, even if it's heavily distorted, because you hear everything, and you have to be very careful what you do with the pick.
Yeah, it exposes the flaws for sure. Absolutely. Okay, Tommy. Well, thank you very much for taking part. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you talk to us. And we've
Yeah.
we've got some really useful information again from that. Really interested to hear your take on the story.